The mansion stood at the edge of the city like a forgotten memory. Cold, quiet, and always awake in the wrong way. Inside it lived two toddlers who hadn't slept properly for months. No one in the house could explain it. Doctors came and left with puzzled faces. Medicines were tried. Remedies were tested. Even the most experienced pediatric specialists admitted they had never seen anything like it. The twins, Ayan and Zara, were only 2 years old, but their eyes carried exhaustion far beyond their age. They would cry at night, not out of hunger or pain, but as if sleep itself had abandoned them. The house had stopped feeling like a home long ago. It had become a place of constant walking, rocking chairs, whispered panic, and sleepless nights that stretched endlessly into morning. Their parents, once hopeful and strong, now looked like shadows of themselves. Especially the mother. She had stopped smiling completely. And the father, once a calm businessman, now lived on phone calls and failed consultations, chasing answers that never arrived. The world outside called it a medical mystery, but inside the house, it felt like something deeper, something no one could name. Every night followed the same pattern. The clock would strike midnight, and within minutes, the silence would break. Two tiny voices would rise from the nursery, crying as if the darkness itself was hurting them. The mother would rush in first, then the father, then the nurse, then the security guard sometimes, standing helplessly outside the door. But nothing worked. Rocking them didn't help. Lullabies failed. Even holding them through the night only made the crying worse. It was as if sleep had become their enemy, and the house had learned to fear the night. On the outskirts of the estate, life moved differently. There was a small servant quarter near the back gate, where a new maid had recently started working. Her name was Samina. She was quiet, observant, and unlike others, she didn't speak much about herself. She had been hired quickly after the previous maid left suddenly, refusing to explain why. No one asked too many questions. The household had already stopped expecting normal answers. Samina was assigned basic duties at first, cleaning, organizing, and helping in the kitchen. She never interfered. She never complained. But she noticed everything, especially the silence during the day and the chaos during the night. On her third day, she finally asked a question, not directly to the family, but to one of the older staff members. Why do the children never sleep? The older nurse hesitated, then replied softly, "They used to sleep like angels. Then one night, it just stopped." Samina didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, but something about her expression changed slightly. Not fear, not shock, just thoughtfulness. That night, as the mansion prepared for another long battle with sleepless crying, Samina did something unusual. She asked permission to help in the nursery. The request surprised everyone. Maid workers did not interfere in the children's room during night hours, but the mother was too exhausted to refuse. "Do whatever you think might help," she said quietly. It wasn't hope. It was surrender. The nursery was softly lit when Samina entered. Toys were scattered everywhere. Ayan and Zara were already restless, their tiny bodies twisting in discomfort, eyes half open as if sleep was something they were trying to remember but couldn't reach. The moment Samina stepped closer, the crying paused. Not completely, but noticeably. She didn't rush toward them. She didn't try to hold them immediately. Instead, she simply stood still for a moment, watching, listening, as if the room itself was speaking. Then she did something unexpected. She sat on the floor, not near the crib, not near the toys, just on the floor in silence, and began humming. It wasn't a nursery rhyme anyone recognized. It was something older, slower, almost like a forgotten lullaby carried through generations without ever being written down. The twins stopped crying for a moment. Their eyes turned toward her, confused, curious. Then slowly, something shifted. For the first time in months, the room did not feel chaotic. The crying didn't vanish completely, but it softened like a storm losing strength. Samina continued humming, without looking at them directly, as if she wasn't trying to force sleep, only inviting peace. Minutes passed. Then something remarkable happened. Ayan blinked slowly and closed his eyes. Zara followed a few seconds later, not fully asleep, but no longer fighting it. The silence in the room felt unreal. Outside the door, the mother stood frozen. She had seen countless attempts before, but nothing had ever worked like this. Even for a moment, she didn't enter. She didn't interrupt. She just watched through the slightly open door. And for the first time in months, she cried silently. Not from exhaustion, but from something dangerously close to hope. When Samina finally stepped out of the nursery, she didn't look proud. She didn't look surprised either. She simply adjusted her dupatta and said calmly, "They are not refusing sleep." The father looked up immediately. "What do you mean?" Samina paused for a moment before answering. It's like something is preventing them from feeling safe enough to fall into it. The room went silent again. That sentence landed differently. Heavier, stranger, almost unsettling. The father frowned. "That doesn't make sense. We've checked everything medically." Samina nodded. "I am not talking about medicine." Another silence followed, longer this time. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from uncertainty. That night, for the first time in months, the twins slept for 47 minutes straight. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was real. And in that house, even 47 minutes felt like a miracle. But what no one noticed was that Samina didn't leave the nursery immediately. She stayed behind a little longer after everyone left, just standing near the window, watching the dark garden outside, as if she was waiting for something, or remembering something, something she had not yet shared. And far beyond the mansion walls, a detail from the past quietly waited to resurface, something that had nothing to do with medicine, and everything to do with that house itself. The next morning arrived without celebration. In the mansion, mornings were no longer peaceful. They were simply a pause between two exhausting nights. The twins had slept for a little under an hour, and that alone had shifted the atmosphere in the house in a way no one expected. It wasn't relief yet. It was confusion mixed with fragile hope. The mother kept replaying the night in her mind again and again. Samina's calm presence, the soft humming, the sudden stillness in the children. It felt too simple to be real. And yet, it had happened. The father called the pediatric specialist again that morning. He described what happened in detail, expecting a medical explanation. But the specialist stayed silent for a long time, then finally said, "Sleep is not just physical. Sometimes children react to emotional environments more strongly than we understand." The father didn't like that answer. It wasn't concrete. It wasn't controllable. And worst of all, it wasn't solvable with medicine. Inside the house, Samina continued her work quietly. She didn't act like someone who had performed a miracle. She moved through rooms like nothing had changed. But she was observing more carefully now. Not just the children, the house itself, the walls, the sounds, even the way light entered the nursery. By afternoon, she asked something unexpected. "Has anything changed in this house before the children stopped sleeping?" The question caught the mother off guard. She hesitated. "No, nothing unusual." But Samina didn't respond immediately. She looked toward the nursery door, then said softly, "Sometimes change is not obvious when you're inside it." That sentence lingered in the air longer than expected. That evening, the twins became restless again. Not as severely as before, but enough to break the fragile calm from the night before. Ayan began crying first. Then Zara followed. The house immediately fell back into panic mode. The nurse rushed in. The father paced outside. The mother sat helplessly on the bed, holding her head. It felt like everything had returned. Except Samina didn't rush. She walked in slowly, as if she already knew something had shifted. This time, she didn't sit immediately. She walked around the nursery once. Slow steps, careful eyes, and then she stopped near the corner of the room, just beside an old wooden cabinet. She stared at it for a long moment, too long. Then she asked quietly, "Has this cabinet always been here?" The father frowned from the doorway. "Yes, it was part of the house when we moved in." Samina nodded slowly, but her expression changed slightly. Not fear, not surprise, something closer to recognition. That night, she requested something unusual. "I want to stay in the nursery after they sleep." The request made the mother uneasy. But exhaustion again overpowered hesitation. She agreed. That night, something different happened. Samina didn't hum immediately. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on the floor near the cabinet. Then she closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening. The twins slowly began to calm down again. Not instantly, but gradually, as if her presence alone created distance between them and their fear. Within 30 minutes, both children fell asleep, deeper than before, longer than before. But Samina didn't move. She stayed seated, eyes open now, watching the cabinet. The room was silent, too silent, and in that silence, she noticed something the others had never paid attention to. A faint sound, not from the children, not from outside, but from within the room itself. A subtle, uneven rhythm, like something very old reacting to presence. Later that night, when the house was asleep, Samina finally stood up. She walked slowly toward the cabinet and placed her fingers on its surface, though it felt unusually cold, colder than the room around it. She traced a small line along its edge, then stopped because she felt it. A gap, not visible, but structural. Something not aligned properly. Something intentionally placed. She stepped back immediately. Her expression hardened slightly. Not fear, but understanding forming into concern. And for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Samina whispered something to herself. This is not about the children. She paused, then added softly, this house is involved. The next morning, the twins woke up earlier than usual, but something had changed again. They were calmer, not cured, but different. The crying had reduced slightly, and for the first time, Zara reached for Samina when she entered the room. Not her mother, not the nurse. Samina. The mother noticed it immediately, and for reasons she couldn't explain, it unsettled her slightly. Later that day, the father received an old file. It had been retrieved from house maintenance records. He hadn't asked for it. It had simply been forwarded after Samina requested historical structural details of property. Inside the file was a layout of the mansion's original design, and something caught Samina's attention immediately. A marked structural change made years before they moved in, right beneath the nursery. That evening, Samina stood outside the nursery again. But this time, she wasn't looking at the children. She was looking at the floor beneath them, and for the first time, she understood that the sleepless nights were not random. They were connected to something hidden in the house long before the family ever arrived. And that realization changed everything, because now, it wasn't just about helping two toddlers sleep. It was about uncovering why the house refused to let them. The morning after the discovery of the old house plans, the mansion felt different, not visibly, but emotionally, as if something unspoken had entered the walls and refused to leave. The twins were calmer again, but only slightly. Their sleep still came in broken fragments, never lasting long enough to be called peaceful. The family was beginning to notice a pattern now. Whenever Samina was near, the children settled. Whenever she left, the restlessness returned. It was subtle, but undeniable. Samina spent most of the day studying the old blueprint. She didn't ask permission again. She didn't need it anymore. Something about the layout had already captured her attention completely. The nursery was not originally part of the house's design. It had been modified later, reconstructed over an older space. And that space had a strange symbol marked in the original documents. A structural note labeled only as Unstable Foundation Zone, sealed during renovation. That evening, Samina asked the father directly, who renovated this part of the house before you moved in? He frowned. I don't know the details. The house was purchased fully renovated. Samina nodded slowly, then said something that made the room fall silent. Sometimes renovation is just another word for covering something. No one responded, because no one liked where that thought was heading. That night, the twins became restless again. But this time, Samina didn't immediately try to soothe them. Instead, she asked everyone to leave the nursery. The request shocked the mother. Leave them alone? They'll cry all night. Samina looked at her calmly. They're already crying every night. The difference is I need to understand what changes when they are with me. The mother hesitated, but something in Samina's voice didn't allow argument. It wasn't forceful. It was certain. The room emptied slowly. Only Samina remained inside with the twins. The crying began almost immediately, but she didn't react. She simply sat on the floor again, and this time she placed her palm directly on the wooden flooring. Not the cabinet, not the walls, the floor, right in the center of the room. And she waited. Minutes passed. The crying slowly reduced, not because the children were comforted, but because something else was shifting. Samina's expression tightened slightly. She had felt it again, that irregular pulse beneath the structure. Not a sound, not vibration in the usual sense. Something deeper, like pressure trapped under layers of time. Then it happened. A faint sound echoed under the floor, a soft wooden creak. The twins suddenly went silent at the same time. Both of them stared at the same corner of the room, as if they had seen something but couldn't express it. Samina stood up immediately and walked toward that corner. Slowly, carefully, she knelt down and pressed her fingers along the seam of the flooring. There, a slight inconsistency, almost invisible, but real, a section that had been sealed differently from the rest of the room, not part of the original construction. Her breathing slowed, because now she understood something important. This wasn't random renovation. It was deliberate concealment. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Samina made a decision. She asked the father for tools. He was confused. What for? She replied simply, to understand why your children cannot sleep in this house. He hesitated, but then handed her what she needed, because at this point, no one had better answers. Only her. Later, in silence, Samina returned to the nursery alone. She placed a cloth under the twins' crib, so the noise wouldn't wake them. Then she began carefully working on the floor seam, not aggressively, not destructively, but precisely, like someone who already knew what she was looking for. After several minutes, the wooden panels shifted slightly. A faint gap appeared. Cold air rose from below, different from the room temperature, older, heavier. Samina stopped for a moment, not because she was afraid, but because she confirmed something she had suspected since the first night. The disturbance wasn't in the children. It was in the space beneath them. She carefully widened the opening just enough to see inside, and what she saw made her freeze for the first time since arriving at the mansion. Below the nursery was not empty ground. It was a sealed chamber, and inside it were markings, old symbols, faded but intentional, arranged in a pattern that suggested ritual placement rather than construction design. Behind her, one of the twins stirred softly in sleep, but instead of crying, Ayan whispered something unintelligible, then became still again. Samina slowly turned her head toward him and understood something deeply unsettling. The children were not reacting to fear. They were reacting to recognition. Something beneath the house was not just affecting them, it was responding to them, as if their presence was triggering something that had never been meant to awaken again. And Samina realized one final thing before closing the panel again. This house was not simply built over something old. It was built to contain it. The night after Samina saw the chamber beneath the nursery, she didn't sleep, not because she was afraid, but because the house had changed the way it felt. It was no longer just a place with a problem. It felt aware, as if something inside it had been disturbed and was now paying attention. The twins slept that night longer than usual, almost peacefully. But Samina noticed something unusual in their sleep. Their breathing synced at the same moments. Their tiny hands moved in unison, and at one point, both of them turned their heads toward the same direction beneath the floor. Without waking, morning came with a strange silence. Even the house staff felt it. Not calm, not peaceful, just suspended, like the house was waiting for something to happen next. Samina requested access to the property purchase documents. The father was surprised again. You think the answer is in paperwork? Samina replied calmly. Sometimes people don't realize they are buying more than a house. He didn't understand what she meant, but he gave her the files anyway. Hours later, while reviewing them, Samina found something unusual. The house had changed ownership multiple times in short intervals before the family bought it. But one detail stood out more than anything else. Every previous owner reported the same issue. Not illness, not structural damage, but the same exact complaint. Children in the house cannot sleep peacefully. The records were vague. Some even dismissed as coincidence. But the pattern was too consistent to ignore. That evening, Samina asked the most important question yet. When you moved here, did you ever feel anything unusual in the nursery? The mother hesitated, then slowly said, "Sometimes it felt like the room wasn't empty even when no one was inside." The father looked uncomfortable. He added quickly, "That's just stress. Moving into a big house does that." But Samina didn't respond, because she already knew stress was not the cause. That night, she returned alone to the chamber beneath the floor. This time, she brought a small light and a cloth to carefully expose more of the sealed opening. The twins were asleep, but their sleep was shallow again, as if something in the house was pulling them between rest and awareness. Samina widened the opening further. Now she could see deeper inside. The chamber was not large, but its walls were covered with markings. Not modern construction marks. Older, intentional, repetitive patterns carved into the foundation. And at the center of the chamber, something unusual was embedded into the ground. A sealed metal plate, rust-covered, but not natural corrosion. It looked like it had been deliberately sealed shut. Samina reached for it, but stopped halfway, because the twins suddenly shifted in their sleep again, both of them at once. And this time, Zara whispered clearly, "Cold," then fell silent again. Samina froze. That wasn't random sleep talk. It was response to something beneath them. She carefully touched the metal plate. The moment her fingers made contact, a faint vibration passed through the floor. Not strong, but precise, like something reacting to recognition. Samina pulled her hand back immediately. Her expression changed for the first time. Not fear, but realization. This was not just a sealed space. It was a controlled space, designed to suppress something. Or someone, and the children above it were sensitive to whatever remained trapped beneath. The next morning, Samina finally revealed part of what she understood. "To everyone," she said quietly, "this house is just a structure." She paused, then added, "But it is also a boundary." The father frowned. "A boundary for what?" Samina looked toward the nursery, and said something that made the room go silent. For something that was never meant to interact with living minds again. That night, she made a decision. She would fully open the sealed chamber. Not partially, not carefully, completely, because the twins were no longer just reacting. They were being affected. And whatever was beneath the house was not dormant anymore. As the family slept upstairs, Samina returned to the nursery with tools again. But this time, the house felt different, heavier, like it knew what was about to happen. The twins stirred in their sleep before she even touched the floor, as if sensing intention rather than action. Samina placed her hand on the sealed panel one last time, and whispered softly, "If you are the reason they cannot rest, then it's time you are understood." And for the first time since she entered the house, the silence answered her, not with sound, but with a subtle, undeniable shift in pressure beneath her hand. Something inside the house had acknowledged her completely. The night the sealed chamber was finally opened, the house did not react immediately. It waited, as if it had been holding its breath for years, and was unsure whether to exhale. Samina stood in the nursery for a long time before moving the final panel. The twins were asleep upstairs in their cribs, but their sleep was unusually restless again. Not crying, not waking, just disturbed, like something inside their dreams was being touched from below. Samina placed her tools down carefully. For the first time, she looked uncertain, not about what she was doing, but about what she might confirm. Because deep down, she already understood the direction everything was pointing, and it was not simple. She opened the final seal. The moment the metal plate shifted, a cold wave rose from beneath the floor. Not air, not wind, something heavier. Something that felt like memory trapped in physical space. The nursery lights flickered briefly, and then stabilized again. Below, the chamber was no longer silent. It responded immediately. A faint, low resonance spread through the structure of the house. And upstairs, both twins opened their eyes at the same time, for the first time in months, completely awake, but not crying, just staring at the ceiling. Samina froze, because she realized something terrifying. They were not reacting to fear. They were reacting to recognition again, but this time it was stronger, clearer, as if whatever was beneath the house was now fully visible to them in a way adults could not perceive. She descended carefully into the chamber. The air inside was colder than anything she had felt before. The walls were covered in old structural carvings, but now she noticed something she hadn't seen before. There were 2 small handprints etched into the far wall. Not ancient, not symbolic. Small, recent, human. Samina stepped closer. Her breathing slowed, because she understood what those marks meant. This space had been accessed before, not long ago, and not by accident. Above her, the twins began to cry simultaneously, not loudly, not uncontrollably, but in a soft, broken rhythm, like they were calling out to something beneath them. Samina finally spoke aloud in the chamber. Who was brought here before them? Silence answered, but not for long, because she already knew the answer. She just needed confirmation. She turned slowly and looked at the seal markings again, this time noticing something she had missed before. The chamber was not built only to contain something. It was built to redirect something, a flow, a response, a connection between the ground and the room above. And then the truth hit her fully. The house was not affecting the twins randomly. The twins were part of the system the house had been designed around, not as victims, but as triggers. The family behind her footsteps approached. The father had followed her down after hearing the crying. "What is happening here?" he asked, panic rising in his voice. Samina didn't look at him immediately. She only said, "This house doesn't stop children from sleeping." She paused, then continued softly, "It wakes them." The mother appeared at the entrance, shaken. "That doesn't make sense. Why would a house do that?" Samina finally turned toward them, and the final truth came out. Because once spoken, it changed everything. This house was built on something that reacts to early consciousness. She pointed upward, to children. A pause, and not just any children. Her voice lowered. Twins. The room went silent. Even the twins upstairs stopped crying, as if listening. Samina continued. The chamber beneath was not meant to trap something dangerous. It was meant to isolate something responsive. She looked at the parents directly. "And your children are not the first." The father shook his head. "That's impossible." But Samina stepped forward and said the final revelation clearly. The previous owners didn't leave because of illness. They left because every pair of twins in this house experienced the same thing. She paused. They stopped sleeping until they were removed from a house. The mother covered her mouth in shock. "And what happens if they stay?" Samina didn't answer immediately, because she was listening to the silence above, where the twins had finally stopped crying completely. Then she whispered, "They are not supposed to stay asleep here." A pause. "They are supposed to stay aware." The house suddenly felt different again, but this time not threatening, not heavy, just complete, like something that had finally finished revealing itself. And then came the final twist. Samina slowly placed her hand on the chamber wall and said something no one expected, because it wasn't about the house anymore. It was about her. "I've seen this before." The parents looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Samina closed her eyes for a moment, then said quietly, "I was one of the twins born in this house years ago." A long silence followed, the deepest silence the house had ever held. She opened her eyes. "And I was the only one who ever learned how to make them sleep again." Above them, for the first time in months, the twins finally fell into deep, uninterrupted sleep, not because the house changed, but because the cycle had been understood and broken. The mansion did not feel haunted anymore. It felt released. And Samina did not leave that night as a maid. She left as someone who had finally closed a door she once opened as a child.